Peter, you've been in the room for negotiations with many countries on trade. Which do you name as the least flexible, the least likely that you'll reach a deal on?
Not my lane, sir. I leave that up to Bob Lighthizer and the president. What I can tell you is this, unequivocally. In the absence of President Trump basically having a tough stand on trade, of setting the standard that trade must be free, fair, and reciprocal, we would not have countries talking to us in earnest like they're talking to us now. And that's the beauty of the Trump trade strategy. I mean, sometimes it creates a little volatility on the stock markets because the president takes rightly strong trade positions. But as you see today, these are the fruits of that strategy. And again, if you're a market investor, I think what you should see is a bullish move towards a structural realignment of a global economy more towards the kind of free trade, free and fair trade that will make everybody prosper, rather than kind of what we've had where there's just a bunch of cheaters in the world getting rich at the expense of American workers.
The clock is ticking on NAFTA's latest deadline. The White House has given Canada until October 1 to make a deal again by the end of the month, or they're going ahead with Mexico, saying they would do so without us. There are several deadlines have already come and gone, and earlier this week, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, suggested that she was not in any hurry to make a deal.
Any negotiator who goes into a negotiation believing that he or she must get a deal at any price, that is a negotiator who will be forced to pay the maximum price for that deal. We absolutely believe that no deal is better than a bad deal.
Well, uncertainty continues to surround the talks, and our next guest knows all about that. Pat Carney is a former Minister of International Trade and one of the negotiators for the original Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And we have now reached her on Saturna Island in British Columbia. So, Ms. Carney, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So President Trump, as we said, has threatened to go ahead with a deal with Mexico by September 30 and leave Canada behind if our two countries cannot come to some form of agreement. As one of the negotiators on the original U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, how should Canadian negotiators treat that deadline?
Well, the deadline is really imposed by Mexico and the U.S. for their own reasons. Mexico wants to close the deal before the new president takes power. And of course, the U.S. is facing midterm elections. Canada doesn't have the same pressure on it. And I view the American deadlines and the whole business of bellicose statements by congressmen to be something like a hockey game where you have a power where the power play is put into effect in order to get the puck into the net with as much pressure as possible. So the minister is really playing a cool stance here when she says, basically, we're not under pressure. It's the Americans and the Mexicans who are under pressure, not Canada.
Is that true, though? Is there pressure for Canada to meet this deadline? Do we risk hurting our economy if we don't meet this deadline?
Well, I'm not at the table, so I can't answer that question. You have to, assume that the minister is perfectly aware of the consequences. In the free trade agreement, the power play was that the three top American cabinet ministers, came 15 minutes before midnight with the demand that we include cultural industries in the free trade agreement. And the finance minister, Mike Wilson, and I, and Derek Burney, the prime minister's chief of staff, said, no, we don't have the mandate to do that. So where I think that the minister is misleading a bit in saying that no deal is better than a bad deal. No deal is a bad deal for Canada. We are very dependent for our economy on U.S. trade. We export about 35% of our gross domestic product to the world, and a lot of that, the majority of that, goes to the U.S. For the U.S., trade is not such a big deal. The U.S. exports about 12% of its GDP, or what it produces. in terms of goods, and of course it's nearly 10 times the size of us. So a bad deal, no deal is a bad deal for Canada, but I think we will get a deal.
Well, from what we are reading and hearing, protection of Canada's dairy industry, a dispute resolution mechanism, protection of intellectual property are, again, reportedly the issues that are holding up these talks. Should any of those be treated as sacred cows as Canada tries to get a deal with the U.S.?
Michael, those are the same key hot spots that we had in our negotiations. Remember, supply management deals with an important food source for us. It deals with trying to ensure that Canadians drink milk produced by Canadian cows on Canadian farms under Canadian health rules. And that's still important rather than being flooded with surplus milk from the U.S. In terms of dispute settlement mechanism, that is basically having a referee to settle disputes between the two countries, and that's still vital. As Prime Minister Brian Mulroney would say to his cabinet, if we don't have a way of settling disputes, if we don't have a referee, what good is an agreement? And on cultural industries, we have to worry about whether Canadians' access to television, what they watch, what they hear on the radio, what they read in print, what they access on the internet, leaves room for Canadian content. We don't want foreign majority ownership. We don't want foreigners owning the various platforms that Canadians use to get Canadian news and Canadian programming. So those are still as important today as they were 30 years ago in the FTA, and they've worked. Mm-hmm. It's been amazing how our industries have thrived under these agreements. So, they don't go away. Yeah, and now we've added the internet, we've added artificial intelligence, we've added all the other, automation, which all have to be tackled. Not an easy job.
Bonjour encore une fois. Another constructive, detailed meeting with Ambassador Lighthizer and his team. The atmosphere continues to be cordial. There is a lot of good faith and goodwill on both sides. We're working hard. Our officials now have some more work to do, and we'll continue working this evening. And then Ambassador Lighthizer and I agreed to meet again tomorrow.
Why is this?
NAFTA is a very complex agreement which governs the largest trading relationship in the world. It governs $2 billion worth of trade every day. For an agreement of this scale, 13 months for a very deep modernization of the kind we're working on is absolutely normal. Trade agreements do take some time, both to negotiate and to update, because the economy is complicated and trade agreements are complicated. And we are absolutely committed to getting this right and to getting a good deal for Canada.
Is there a deadline this week?
Canada's sole objective, the only target that we are aiming for, is getting a good deal for Canada. And so that's what we're focused on.
Prime Minister.
Thanks a lot. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.
So tomorrow what time?
I'll let you know.